Today's episode of Variant is brought to you by Domain.com.
Today on Variant, it's finally happening. I'm giving you guys what you've wanted, the history of Moon Knight. Welcome to Variant, where we love comics more than Moon Knight needs his own Netflix original series or a movie. I'm your host, Aris Quinones. Hands down, the two most requested History of episodes have been Spawn, which I did several months ago, and a History of Moon Knight episode. And since I already did Spawn, that leaves me with Moon Knight. And don't worry, I'll get to other requested characters all in due time, but as for today, it's all about Moon Knight. Moon Knight was created by writer Doug Munch and artist Don Perlin, and his first appearance was in Werewolf by Night issue 32 in 1975. Originally, he appeared as an enemy of the character in a 2-issue story arc. However, Moon Knight proved to be so popular that due to reader demand, he returned to guest star in Marvel Spotlight, Spectacular Spider-Man, Marvel 2-in-1, and The Defenders, which helped define his background before he gained his own run as a backup feature in Hulk magazine. He was then finally given his own solo comic book series in 1980. Moon Knight has had several different ongoings since then, and of course has evolved quite a bit as a character, but now let's see what his comic book origin is. Moon Knight's real name is Mark Spector, and he was born in Chicago, Illinois. As an adult, Spector spends his time training to be a heavyweight boxer, a US Marine, and a mercenary. He becomes a skilled combatant and best friends with the French pilot Jean-Paul Deschamps, who he calls Frenchie. While working for the African mercenary Raoul Bushman in Egypt, the group stumbles upon an archaeological dig whose crew includes Dr. Peter Alran and his daughter Marlene. The dig had uncovered an ancient temple where artifacts included a statue of the Egyptian moon god Khonshu. But of course, Bushman wants the gold that will be found at the tomb and could care less about anything else. Dr. Alran finds out about this and tries to stop him, but Bushman ends up snapping his neck. In response to Alran's murder, Spector attacks Bushman but is beaten to near death and left to die in the sub-zero temperatures of the desert night. Roaming Egyptians who worship the ancient Egyptian gods find Spector and carry him to their temple. Helpless before the statue of Khonshu, Spector's heart stops. Khonshu appears to him in a vision, offering Spector a second chance at his life if he becomes the god's avatar of Earth. Spector awakens, wraps himself with the silver shroud that covers Khonshu's statue, and again confronts Bushman. After defeating Bushman, Mark returns to the US with Marlene and Frenchie, along with the statue of Khonshu. He decided to continue his work to fight the war against evil and used the savings that he had collected during his mercenary days and invested it, turning it into a small fortune, which he proceeded to finance and support his private war and set up shop in New York City. In an effort to distance himself from his mercenary days, Mark created the persona of Stephen Grant, a millionaire entrepreneur and high roller whose personality enabled him to walk among the high rollers and elites of New York City. Realizing the value of these contacts, as criminal activities are often plotted and planned at cocktail parties and boardrooms, Mark also decided to create a persona for lower level contacts and invented the identity of Jake Lockley, a New York City cab driver. Through Lockley, he was able to make several contacts on the streets. So as you can clearly see, this character has a bunch of different personas, 4 to be exact: Mark Spector, Stephen Grant, Jake Lockley, and of course, Moon Knight. Juggling his different personas eventually put a serious strain on Spector's mental health, and he suffered a nervous breakdown and was deemed to be suffering from multiple personality disorder. Shortly after developing his costume and weapons, along with a customized helicopter known as the Mooncopter, Frenchie posed as a French businessman and made a contact with a group known as the Committee. They had plans to capture Jack Russell, aka Werewolf by Night, whom they intended to use as a weapon to rule the city. And this, my friends, brings us full circle, because these events happened in Moon Knight's first appearance in Werewolf by Night issue 32, and Moon Knight's origin was later given to us in his own ongoing series several years later. But now I'm going to continue to elaborate on Moon Knight's first adventure in comics, since we did come full circle after all. Frenchie acted as a middleman and presented the Committee members with Mark Spector as a mercenary and revealed the Moon Knight costume and weapons which Frenchie claimed that he had created to battle Jack Russell. After Moon Knight was hired, he successfully defeated Russell, but when he discovered that the Committee wanted to use the werewolf as a weapon, he released him and defeated the Committee. And thus we have the vigilante, Moon Knight. Speaking of vigilante, a lot of people say he's Marvel's Batman, or just compare him to Batman because they have a lot of similarities. They're both rich, they both use gadgets to help them fight crime, and they both creep around in the shadows with their capes, fighting for justice all vigilante style. Skipping ahead a bit in Moon Knight's history, the Committee hired Bushman to attack Moon Knight once again. As part of their campaign, they wanted Bushman to physically cripple him, and both Mark's legs were severely broken. I mean, just look at that. It looks like a herd of walkers were just gnawing at his knees. In any case, Bushman grew overconfident, thus leaving his guard down, so in a fit of indescribable rage, Moon Knight used one of his crescent darts to carve off Bushman's face, all Death of the Family Joker style. Unable to continue his career as Moon Knight, Mark began taking more and more painkillers and antipsychotics, burning through his fortune, and was no longer able to maintain his crumbling financial empire. Later, Spector learns that one of the struggling companies he still retains ownership of has just made a significant technological breakthrough, and he will once again man be wealthy and begins to rebuild himself and his life, finally getting himself out of his wheelchair and beginning physical therapy. It's only afterwards that Mark discovered that the Egyptian god Khonshu was responsible for the entire affair. His reputation had taken a nosedive, and so Khonshu decided to ensure his Knight of Vengeance was firmly back in the saddle, nudging the committee and even arranging for Mark's wealth to be restored while reminding him who and what he is, Khonshu's Knight of Vengeance. In the Marvel Now rendition of Moon Knight, Mark utilizes two personas. The first is Moon Knight, which of course we all know, but the second persona is Mr. Knight. In this persona, he's dressed in an all-white business suit, gloves, and mask, who consults the New York Police Department and deals with common thugs and crimes such as kidnapping. And that, my friends, brings me to powers and abilities. Moon Knight possesses a wide range of skills and abilities, including military strategy and tactics, infiltration and stealth techniques, military interrogation, and torture techniques. He's also a competent pilot who can fly most types of aircrafts. He's an expert in a wide range of military firearms, including pistols, sniper rifles, and machine guns, with a marksman's rating. Moon Knight is a highly skilled combatant who is equally adept in both unarmed and armed fighting techniques. He's a former heavyweight boxing champion who has comprehensive knowledge of weak points of the human body. Moon Knight is such a skilled fighter, he even defeated Deadpool in Vengeance of Moon Knight issue 8. And due to Moon Knight's multiple identities, he has resistance to some psychic attacks. Moon Knight also loves his weapons and gadgets, and thanks to his immense wealth, he has financed and developed numerous weapons, armored costumes, devices, specialty vehicles, and equipment as Moon Knight. He has his crescent darts, which are basically his versions of batarangs. You have his truncheon, which is his version of a grappling gun, and then he uses brass knuckles with spikes on them and a katana, and so on. Moon Knight has worn a variety of body armor over the years. His default costume for years was a full body suit of bulletproof Kevlar that was equipped with a two-way radio in his cowl that enabled him to maintain contact with his mooncopter. And now that I've summed up his powers and abilities, clearly he's very similar to Batman. And that, my friends, pretty much wraps up my recap of Moon Knight's history. Clearly I didn't mention every story or aspect of Moon Knight, as that would be impossible since he's been around for a very long time. But to recap everything for you, Moon Knight was a dude who was brought back to life by the Egyptian lunar god of vengeance and then became a BA vigilante with a multiple personality disorder. Boom. Recapped. But you know what time it is. It's time for me to give you some reading recommendations. You have Moon Knight Divided We Fall, Vengeance of Moon Knight Volume 1 Shock and Awe, Essential Moon Knight Volume 1, Moon Knight from the Dead, and Moon Knight Dead Will Rise. When you buy a domain name from domain.com, you get the power to influence and control what people find when they search for you online. No domain extension will help you tell your story like a .com or .net domain name. Domain.com is affordable, reliable, and easy to use. The guys at domain.com gave Variants an awesome offer. Get 15% off domain.com's already affordable domain names and web hosting when you use the coupon code Variants at checkout. So when you think domain names, think domain.com. First up for Wednesday, September 9th, we have Darth Vader issue 9. This series has been really good thus far, and it's a must-read for any Darth Vader fan. Here we have Action Comics issue 44. The epic truth story arc reaches its finale, as Superman makes some brutal choices and discovers the source of the Shadow Warriors. Now we have Batman Superman issue 24. Superman discovers the true fate of Batman and makes a fateful decision. And finally, we have Batman issue 44. It's the origin of the new villain, Mr. Bloom. In a tale from Bruce Wayne's past, Batman must investigate a vicious crime in the shadowy area of Gotham City known as the Narrows. And that'll bring another episode of Variant to a close. But remember, you can always like our Variant Facebook page to keep up with the show and all things comic related. You can also follow Variant on Twitter at Variant Comics or me on Twitter at Eris_Quinones. And if you like what you see, be sure to subscribe to our channel. But I'll see you guys next week when I talk about all things comics. And since I did Spawn, that leaves me with training to be a heavyweight boxer.